Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the State Library. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. There are handouts available for those of you that just signed in. What you should see on the right-hand side of your screen is a menu. If you don't see the menu, there's a little orange arrow you can click on to pop the menu out. And there are two handouts that are available, the handout for the slides for the webinar, and also some other informational handouts. And you can download those at any time. If you, for any reason, have difficulty doing it, after the webinar, when I send out some of the follow-up information, I will also send out copies of the handouts. So if you're having trouble downloading them, don't worry, you will get them eventually. So we'll be starting in about 2-3 minutes. I'm gonna wait until we get a couple of more people actually in. Let's see. Okay. And so what we'll be doing today is talking briefly about writing a proposal. And again, like I said, a bunch more people just came in. Welcome to the State Library. And if you'll look on your screen, you should see on your screen a menu on the right-hand side. And if you don't see the menu, there's a little orange arrow you can click on to pop out the menu. And under the handout section, what you'll see is the two handouts, the slides, and also some other handouts, informational handouts. You can download those PDFs at any time. And if you're having difficulty doing that, we'll be sending them out I'll be sending them out later today or tomorrow morning. So you'll get them one way or the other if you're not able to download them. You should be able to download them. It's not difficult. It's just PDF files. So we got about another minute before we start. Again, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that chat during the session, and if you have any questions, just go ahead and ask them. And especially if you come across something in the presentation which doesn't make sense, and just go ahead and pop a question in there and I'll answer it as soon as I can. Because if you've got a question about it, plenty of other people probably have a question about it as well. Let's see. Going to give one more minute and then we'll be starting. Got plenty more people coming in. Okay. This session is being recorded, and so you'll be getting a link to the recording. So if you have to leave early for any reason, something else comes up, the session is recorded and you'll get that link. It takes a while for it to chew on the recording, so it might be later this afternoon before you actually get the link, but you should get an email linking to it. And then once we've got it finished processing, we'll post it on our YouTube channel for the State Library. Okay, let's see, what time is it now? Okay, getting close towards starting time. Okay, I think we got enough people in. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the State Library. For those of you that aren't familiar with the State Library, we are a state agency, and we are primarily in charge of all the state and federal funding that goes to public libraries in South Carolina. And so we are actually a grant-making agency, and people can actually get grant money from us if you are a public library in South Carolina. So that's something to always think about if you're a member of a public library, or if you're working at a public library, or if you're maybe one of the friends groups of a public library. There is money out there for public libraries in their programs. And we'll be talking about various ways to write proposals to get grants for libraries or nonprofits or other agencies. I'm Dawn Mullen. What you should see on your screen is my contact information. This is also if you download the handouts, which are over in the on the side box, that information will be there. You're always welcome to contact me if you have any questions about grants and other information dealing with proposals. And at the end of what I'm going to cover first is information on how to actually write the proposal. And then towards the end of the presentation, I'll actually cover some resources that we have, and a lot of it which is available free. That's great, which is a far cry from what used to be available even as little as 5 or 6 years ago. There's a lot of good, really good free stuff out there now. Again, I'm Dawn Mullen. I'm a reference librarian here at the State Library. And so I also do reference work, State Library. So what does the State Library do besides assist the public libraries? We've also got a good collection here of South Carolina information. We're not the place to go to do your family history research. That would be the state archives. But for the State Library, if you're doing any sort of research on general history of South Carolina, if you're doing history of state government, we have that information here. We have state documents like the annual reports from all the state agencies. We're in the midst of digitizing huge numbers of state documents. And you're like, well, who's interested in state documents? Well, there's a lot of stuff that's really interesting in there that people are interested in. If you're doing family history research, one thing that we do have on our website is we've digitized the school directories. The Department of Education has been publishing directories of public schools going all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century. And we've digitized all of those. And it's a good way to track down, oh, where did my grandma go to school? And we've got all that information online, plus a lot of other really interesting things. And so that's one resource that we have. And one of the other resources that we have here is our grants research collection. The grants research collection is primarily a database of funders, and we have plenty of other information. We're a library, we have books, we have ebooks, we have real print books on how to write proposals, how to manage nonprofits. There's plenty of really interesting information out there. And I'll probably cover a little bit of that when we get towards the end of the presentation. But let's actually start and take a look at what it takes to actually write a proposal. So this is a basic introduction to proposal writing, also called grant writing. You'll probably see that used interchangeably wherever you go take a look at information online on proposal writing and such. And so what we're going to cover today is the basic components. The number one thing to always know about writing proposals is that you will always follow the guidelines that the funder gives. The funder is the one giving out the money. The funder is the one that will give the directions for how they want the proposal to be written. But for the past 40, 50, 60 years, most funders ask for the same basic information. And what I'm going to show you today is the basic components so that you can actually create a template for writing a proposal that can then be modified to meet pretty much any funder's guidelines. And so the first thing to remember is that proposal writing is a process. And that process starts with planning. One of the problems I have with people that come, they hear the State Library has information on grants. So they come to the library and they say they need a grant. I'm like, well, that's nice. What do you need a grant for? I want to help kids. Well, that's really good. What do you want to help kids do? I want to help them learn to read. And as you go through this process, you realize they actually do have a specific problem in mind, but you have to actually design all the steps to the planning. You basically have to design, what do you need that money for? We want to do an after-school program. We want to do a tutoring program. What exactly do you want that information, that money for? How is it you're going to help people? Who is it you're going to help? How are you going to help them? All this information is stuff that you really need to have before you start looking for money. And that's really important. You know, before you actually start looking for money, what is it you need that money for? And once you've got that planning done, and this is really important because the more detailed your plan is, the easier it will be to write your proposal, because that proposal is basically an outline of what it is you're going to use that money for, and is how you're going to describe to the funder, this is what we want the money for. Once you've got that done, that's when you actually start looking at the research process, the research of who it is you're going to actually approach to ask for the money. You know, are you going after a federal agency? Are you going to go after a state agency? Are you going after a private foundation? Who is it you're going to approach? We do have resources here at the State Library that will help you in that research process. There is a lot of stuff available online. Now, remember, if you're going after federal or state grants, all that information is available online. Government grants, there's no special resource that you need to purchase or pay for to actually go after that. All that information for government grants is available free online. So you got your grants.gov, which is the main resource for federal grants. And most of the state agencies that also offer grants have it on their websites as well. So that's much easier. For the private foundations, that gets a little more difficult. And we've got resources for that here at the State Library, including a database of funders. And I'll show you those after the presentation. But it's very important to figure out exactly who you're going to approach, because the thing to remember is, you know, why do you want to get money from them? Funders all have their own particular purposes for giving out money. If you're contacting the Department of Education for a grant, you would be more than likely doing it for a program dealing with education. If you're trying to do a conservation project, probably not the Department of Education. You need to think about who it is you're going to be approaching, and that's all part of your research process. And once you've actually done that research, which, by the way, the next webinar we have coming up next month is specifically on how to find those funders. So you might take a look at our calendar and see if you might want to sign up for our Finding Funders webinar. The writing is the part that comes after you've done all this research and planning. And if you've done the planning properly, putting it all together should be easier. One of the reasons I do this very brief, actually, webinar on, you know, it's only an hour and a half, doing this on proposal writing, is to just let you know that it's not a horrible process to put a proposal together. If you've done all the planning for the proposal, the actual project that you want to produce for your organization, the writing should be easier because you've already done all that planning. And if you're struggling to write, you might want to go back and look and see, have I done all the planning I need to do? Have I actually covered all the steps? And the writing part, that's what we'll be covering. And then, of course, once you've written the proposal, you've submitted it to the funder, then there's the follow-up. You know, what to do once the decision has been made. And, you know, sadly, the answer is usually no, because grants are very competitive, but sometimes the answer is yes, and that's a wonderful thing. So part of that planning process is always to realize, you know, do you have enough time? And do you have enough time to actually plan the project? Do you have enough time to carry it out? And do you have enough time to actually wait for funders to make their decision as to whether or not they're going to give you a grant? What I like to tell people is always think 6 months to a year ahead. It is now March. If you're running a summer program, you should have already submitted all your proposals to funders, because more than likely March is the deadlines for most of these summertime programs have already passed. And if you're just now starting to think about having a summer program, you probably will not have enough time to actually submit a proposal. And if your organization doesn't already have enough money to cover the cost of running a program for summer, you may have to think about next summer. So always think 6 months to a year ahead. And that's also true of doing fundraising. If you're just going out and doing fundraising in the community, you also need to think about enough lead time to get enough money, enough planning, enough resources to carry that program out. And something I'll remember, what are you asking for? And that's important because some funders will fund some types of projects and not others. Are you doing like the example I was using, you're doing like a summer reading program for students? Are you actually trying to build a service center or a community center? Are you renovating a building? Do you want a piece of equipment? If you're doing a Meals on Wheels type programs, are you trying to actually purchase something like a bus or a van for delivering those meals? That's all important because some funders are restricted in what types of grants they give for what types of purposes. So that also helps in your research process. So you want to purchase a van, you need to look for funders. That's part of your research process. You need to look for funders that actually will provide funds for a piece of equipment like that. And all part of your research, and always making sure you've got enough time. Part of that research process is also matching yourself to what the funder wants. You know, why does the federal government give out grants? Why does a private foundation give out grants? So think about the Duke Endowment, which is based out of Charlotte. You know, what type of grants do they give? They give primarily health-related grants. And so the thing to always look at is our program going to match what the funders' interests are? You know, why was that foundation set up? The Duke Endowment was set up specifically to deal with health issues, mostly in rural areas. So if you're going to approach them, the program you're trying to fund needs to match their interest. And so part of that research process, finding that right fit, and that sometimes can take a lot of research. Fortunately, we got resources that can help you on that. Once you've done all that planning, once you've done all that research, that's when you actually start the writing process. Now, there's probably about 150,000 private funders out there, from corporate giving programs to private foundations. And you would think that, okay, well, you know, we'll just go to Google, type in the name of a foundation, and their website will pop out. Unfortunately, out of those 150,000 funders, less than 20% even have a website. And there's two reasons for that. One of them, many of these foundations are very small, or they only give in a very, very limited geographic area. Example of that here in South Carolina, the Doctors Bruce and Lee Foundation, which is based out of Florence County. They're actually not very small. They're actually one of the largest foundations in South Carolina, but they have no website. And the reason why is that they only give in Florence County. They have an office in Florence County. People that want to contact them for funding live in Florence County, they operate in Florence County, they can just go by the office or give them a call. They don't need a website. And it tends to be only the larger funders that have websites, and many of them will also have online applications. For you, if you are a total newbie towards writing a proposal, doing a grant application, what I recommend is that you start first with some of these larger funders that have websites and have online applications. So things like here in South Carolina, the South Carolina Sisters of Charity. At a larger level, the Dollar General Literacy Foundation. They all have they all have websites, they all have online applications. And the nice thing about online application is it takes you step by step and tells you everything that you need to put in. So for those of you that are just totally nervous about sitting down and writing a proposal, you might want to start with one of those online applications. And no matter what, always follow the funder's guidelines. I will mention that multiple times. when I'm going to this presentation because it's extremely important. One of the ways that funders weed out the very competitive grants in their grant process is to make sure that everybody who submits has followed their guidelines. So if they say 5 pages and you submit 6, they're going to toss your application. And so what they want to do is they want to be able to compare apples to apples. And if you do something that's not in their guidelines, you're talking apples to oranges, and they just don't have time for that. They'll just discard it. Okay, specific proposal elements. And we'll cover these individually. But when you're talking about a proposal, you've usually got the executive summary. That's just basically a summary, also called an abstract of the proposal. The narrative part of the proposal where you're actually got that's the meat of the proposal. So you've got what the statement of need is, who is it you're helping, why do they need help? The description of the project, information about your organization, and a conclusion. The all-important budget and supporting materials are also very important. So what do funders want to know? Okay, part of that narrative, what's the specific need that you're addressing? Example, if you've got a Meals on Wheels program, and Meals on Wheels is the specific name of an organization, but it's almost become generic for any type of meal delivery program in a community. And so the specific need that's being addressed there would be seniors, others in the community that don't have regular access to food, that aren't able to actually go out and leave their residence, that maybe not have enough funding to get enough food. And that's a specific need. And usually it requires evidence. Who is it you're going to, how do you know that there's this need in the community? Maybe you're working with social service agencies. You've got statistics on number of seniors in the community. You're working with local aid agencies that know that a lot of these people have requested assistance. Statistics, evidence, a lot of funders require this to some level. If you're doing a very large federal grant for hundreds of thousands of dollars, you probably will have to write a very, very long detailed section with statistical support and evidence for the need you're trying to address. Smaller projects, not so much. The thing to remember when you're actually pulling up things like the statistics is you don't want to overwhelm the funder. You want to have just enough to prove your point and not too much. That specific need you're addressing, who is it you're helping? If you're doing a summer reading program, why are you doing a summer reading program? Well, one of the reasons why is that you know that there is a specific number of children in the community, number of students that are not meeting their reading levels. One of the nice things about education, especially public education, is that there is a lot of standardized testing and statistics that are released on a regular basis so that you can track that information very well. And make sure that the need you're addressing will fit the size and scale of your solution. So if you're concentrating on a particular school district or a particular school in that school district, when you actually design your program, it needs to scale with the size and the number of students you're trying to help. And that's one thing that funders do look for, is that you're not getting too ambitious. Is because they look at the size of your organization, they look at the other resources you have available, and they're like, this is a very ambitious project. We're not sure they're going to be able to carry it out. The audience and community that you're serving, that's something that you do need to specify. We're serving 6th grade students in School District 1 at Ford Middle School. You need to be very specific in telling who it is you're serving. And also, what is it you're trying to achieve? This is more the description of what it is you hope you're going to accomplish with your project. These are the outcomes. And those outcomes must be measurable. And that's very important because you need to know, how is it if you're outcomes are not measurable, how do you know that you're succeeding? So you've got your goals and objectives. And one thing you'll notice, and for those of you that came in, take a look at the menu that's on the right-hand side of your screen, or you just click on that little orange arrow and it'll pop up, and you can download the 2 handouts for this webinar. And one of the handouts is an proposal outline. It talks about the goals and objectives. The goals are the overall statement of what it is you hope to accomplish. The objectives, that's that nice little acronym SMART. And I've seen this now. I didn't used to see it very much. I'm seeing this little acronym SMART in private funders. I'm seeing it with federal grants. The wording sometimes changes, but you've got specific, you've got measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. What are those? The objectives are basically the measurable outcomes of what you hope to accomplish. So specific, how many students will you be serving? How many people will you be delivering meals to? Measurable. Now, if you're helping the number of students, how do you know that you're actually helping them learn to read? You can do a pre-test or a post-test. Achievable and realistic kind of work together. If you're a small organization and you're going to be working with, probably about 20 students at one school, are you a large enough organization that you would be able to do, 30, 40, 50 students? Is it achievable? Is it realistic that you'd be able to do that? Another part of that is the outcome that you're striving for. Is it something that you'd actually be able to carry out? Is it realistic? You're not going to take 6th grade students and get them reading that are below grade level and get them to college level reading over the course of a summer. That's not really realistic unless you've got some really fantastic and talented students. Also time bound. You're asking for a pot of money. So the pot of money that you're asking for has to be for a specific amount of time. In the case of like a summer program, that might be for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, June, July. And if you're doing like a Meals on Wheels program, well, you're doing that year round. But the amount of money that you're actually asking for has to apply to a specific time period. So we're looking to fund 3 months of our Meals on Wheels program, where we're going to be serving 200 seniors in the Casey, South Carolina, in the Winsboro area. And so that time bound tells the funder is that this is why we're asking for this much money, because we hope to have it covered this amount of time. That's all part of your planning process, where you're actually planning your project and then figuring out how much time it's going to take and figuring out how much it costs. The strategies for making it happen. Very important. This is probably going to be the most important part of the proposal, where you're actually telling the funder, okay, we want this much money. This we've identified that this community has a particular need. They need help, and this is how we're going to help them. The plan of action. All that planning you did at the beginning, what is it? How are you actually going to help this community you're trying to serve? You're taking these students and you're trying to get them to a higher reading level. How are you going to do that? The specific plan of action is very important. This is the meat of your proposal. It's the part that the funder will probably spend the most time on. And it's usually been one of the #1 reasons why you may not get funded. The funder looks at this and says, I'm not really sure that they know what they're doing. They don't describe enough. So even though you may know what you're doing, this is the part where you need to really, really show everything of what you're doing. Your proposal is basically your organizing plan. An evaluation, this is just as important as describing how you're going to be running your project. This is why those objectives, the SMART acronym, this is why your objectives need to be measurable. Basically, how do you know if you're successful? So if in your summer reading program, your objective is to help 20 students over a 8-week period, one of the key indicators of success is, did we help those 20 students? Did we do a pre-test and a post-test? Data collection and analysis is really important. And the problem is with a lot of they're not fun. There's very few people that actually get thrilled at collecting data. And things like taking attendance, actually keeping up with the number of drivers you have, how many meals you've delivered. It really is very important to keep track of that data. And one of the things a funder wants to know is, how are you going to collect that data? Who is responsible? I have seen some federal grant guidelines where they not only specify they need the information on evaluation, they want to know who is it that's going to be responsible for collecting it. Sometimes they'll even want to name who's the person in the organization that is responsible for collecting this data and putting it together. It's something that you really need to make sure that, even if you're doing this with money that you raise from other funding sources, if funding from the community, a donor that gave you a big enough chunk of money to carry out a project, you still need to do this, even if it's not required by the funder, because you need to know, are you successful? One of the best ways to do that is to do a timeline. If you're carrying a project out, doing a timeline to monitor. Okay, first week we should accomplish this. Second week we should accomplish this. Anybody that's ever renovated their kitchen knows that there's a timeline. First week, demolition. Second week, plumbing. Third week, electrical. Getting in the appliances, doing the flooring. And if you happen to fall behind or get ahead of any of those steps, that can mess up the rest of the steps. So timelines are really, really useful when you're carrying out these types of projects. Usually the easiest section of any proposal is, why are you the best organization to do this work? This is where you have to brag. The thing to remember is that grants are extremely competitive. There's a lot of nonprofits out there. There's a lot of agencies. There's a lot of schools all scrambling for the same amount of grant money. And what you have to convince the funder is not only that you've got a great plan for carrying out your project, but you've also got a lot of experience. You've got credibility as an organization to actually carry this out. One thing that funders really don't like is redundancy in proposals. They don't like saying that there is a bunch of different organizations trying to carry out the same project and serve the same audience in a particular geographic area. So what they want to know is, why are you the best organization? Why are you the one that's going to be able to actually help this particular group of people, this particular community? So this is where you brag. This is where you talk about your various partnerships. This is where you talk about the experience you've had carrying out these programs elsewhere. This is where you would highlight a particular member of your organization that has extensive experience or knowledge in the particular area that you're looking for funding in. How will the project sustain itself over that long term? This is where a lot of organizations squirm a little bit, like, well, we'll just get more grant money. Well, funders don't like to be the sole source of funding for any project. They want to know that you've got a plan for other types of fundraising. You're going to go after other grants. You're going to establish new fundraising projects in the community. Maybe you're going to do a fundraiser. You're going to actually work with another organization to see if you can get funding. It is important to the funder to know that you have thought ahead. if this is a successful program, they want to know that you thought about the future of the program. Now, if you're doing something like a renovation project or you're trying to purchase a piece of equipment, part of this sustainability would be like, okay, well, we're going to, you're looking for money to buy a van. Okay, well, how are you going to pay for the insurance? How are you going to pay for the maintenance? How are you going to pay for the gas? That's all the stuff that you would actually talk about here for that. Because buying a piece of equipment, it's kind of like getting a free puppy. You might get a grant to buy that equipment, but it's got to be maintained, and that can get very expensive. Something that with the variability in gas prices, a lot of organizations that provide transportation of some sort, that's been a struggle for them. Gas prices go up, they go down, they go up, they go way up, and it can actually affect how you're able to carry out your projects. It can, it's not just small organizations that can be affected. Very large organizations can be seriously affected. And things like Habitat for Humanity. Last summer the cost of construction materials went through the roof, and they were seriously affected in how many projects they could actually carry. How many homes could they build? So, every organization, large or small, can be affected by these factors that are outside their control. But it's one of the things that funders want to know is, do you have a plan for that? Now, conclusion, this is typically something you won't see in an online application. So if you're applying for a literacy grant from the Dollar General Literacy Foundation, you generally won't find something like this on their online application. But it's still a good section to include when you're actually creating a proposal template. And the conclusion, it's basically that. It's a concluding statement that you have tailored to a particular funder. What it shows is that you've actually done research. You know that this particular funder is really interested in education, that they have funded similar projects before. And this is where you state that, with the funding, we can actually carry out not only our objectives, but your goals for the community to assist them in these particular subject areas. The budget, the fund budget. The budget is often looked at first. The thing to remember is that when you actually submit a proposal to a foundation, specifically a private foundation, not quite so much with government funders, federal funders, or state funders, but more often with private funders. Many times the reviewers are business people. They're used to looking at the numbers. And I've actually looked at interviews with the reviewers, some of the major foundations, and they'll come right out and say the first thing they look at is the budget. Now, the thing to remember is that when you describe your project, that section of the proposal where you're describing your plan of action, what it is you're going to be doing, how it is you're going to be helping, how it is you're going to meet those goals and objectives. The thing to remember, everything that's mentioned there needs to be reflected in the budget. And reviewers that have a lot of experience looking at proposals, they'll just flip through the entire thing and they'll look at the budget first. I've actually seen some guidelines where the first thing you attach to the proposal is the budget. And that's more important than the actual proposal itself. Detailed cost for the program project should be included. And depending on the funder, most of them will ask for the complete cost of the project and other sources of funding that you have. Many funders ask for a match to the grant they give. So if you're asking for $5,000 from a funder, they require that you have a matching, that you match that, which means either from your own fundraising or from other grants that you get or from other sources. And don't forget that in many cases, those other sources of funding can be in kind. And what that means is, say that you're a partner with a local community center and they give you free space to run your programs. Well, it may not cost you anything, but if you had to go and rent that space, you're talking probably a couple of $1,000s a month to rent. So that's an in-kind gift, and it's also something that you can put as a source of funding on your project proposal budget. And again, it really does depend on the funder. Their guidelines can be very specific, but in most cases, they will accept that. You know, if you're running a after-school program, and the kids got to meet somewhere. So, are you partnering with the school? Is the school providing a place for you to meet? Are you partnering with, again, the local community center, and they're providing a room for you to meet in? That's basically money you don't have to spend, and you can put it in your budget. You can just take a look at how much it would cost you to actually rent a room and put that in the budget as a source of funding. They're giving us this room for free, but it's basically giving us $2,000 a month. Everything that is in your project description within your proposal should be reflected in the budget, and everything in the budget should be reflected in the project description. If you're talking about an after-school program and there is a specific curriculum that you intend to purchase, any of you that's in the education field know if you're buying some of these specialized curriculums, the workbooks, the software programs, some of them can get really, really expensive. And if you mention that in your project description, but you don't have it listed in your budget, for most reviewers, that will be a red flag. Like, when you're talking about this description, you got to purchase this material. You have to purchase this particular curriculum. You have to purchase these workbooks. Anybody that ever remembers buying textbooks remembers how expensive they are. And if they find something that's listed in the budget that's not in the description and vice versa, for them, that's a huge red flag. And it's probably going to be something that, if they like your project otherwise, they might contact you and ask for more details. More often than not, it just means that your proposal will go down to the bottom of the list. Always follow the funder's guidelines. No matter what the funder asks for, provide it in your proposal. They want that 3-page, they want that 4-page, do that. And one of the reasons why that is so important, I have reviewed proposals, and having every proposal look the same, having the same sections, having the same questions answered in the same section, makes it so much easier to review them. I can flip through them really quick, and it's like, okay, this is good, this is good, this is good. And then you get to the proposal where they didn't follow the directions. They got the sections reversed. They got things in one section that should be in another section. And that just takes you completely out of this nice little groove that you're in when you were doing the reviewing. And in the case of federal funding, if you're doing a federal proposal, typically what they will do is they grade those sections. And I've hated to do this. It was a great project. It sounded great. I had to give it a 0 for a particular section because it was not what we asked for. They're that strict. And so remember, this is a very, very, very competitive process. Always follow the funder's guidelines. For larger funders that have program officers, you can always contact them and ask for some clarification. For federal agencies and most state agencies, they usually have a program officer that's in charge of this that welcomes your questions. They want to answer your questions before you submit your proposal. For the smaller private foundations, often it's very difficult to get in contact with them or to get answers from them for a specific question. So if you're able to actually contact the funder and get clarification, do that before you submit the proposal. If you're not able to get that information for them, you have to remember that you may not be able to get the grant just because you weren't able to figure out what it is they wanted. And that's unfortunate truth when it comes to a lot of private foundations. They don't give very good information on their guidelines. The executive summary. Again, if you're doing an online application, typically there is no executive summary, which is basically a summary of the proposal or an abstract. And let's say you've got maybe a 5-page proposal, 6-page proposal. The length of the executive summary is either specified by the funder or usually just proportional to this length of the grant. If you've got a 5-page proposal, a half-page executive summary is just fine. So basically, you're taking a look at everything. And remember, you write the proposal first, then you write the executive summary. And it's quite permissible to actually do like a cut and paste of significant statements from the proposal into the executive summary. Just make sure that it doesn't look like it's cut and pasted. Just make sure that it all reads well and they're able to understand it. For those of you that typically look at articles from academic journals, you'll notice that most of those academic journals, the articles come with what's called an abstract, which is also basically the same thing as an executive summary. So that's the same process. And again, those same reviewers that take a look at the budget first, a lot of times they'll look at the budget, then they'll read the executive summary, and they'll decide then, do we need to actually read the entire proposal? Okay, supporting materials. Always follow the funder's guidelines. If the funder doesn't ask for it, do not include it. This is not where you throw in the cute little things that some of the students have done. Maybe if they did a nice little drawing, don't throw that in there. You can put that on your website, and you might mention to the funder that, you know, this information is available on the website. But if they don't ask for it, don't include it. Online applications, you typically can just put links to specific things on your website, like a list of your board members. The number one things that most funders ask for, number one thing is a copy of, for those of you that are 501c3 tax exempt organizations, they want a copy of your IRS letter of determination. If you're a 501c3 organization, that's the letter that comes from the IRS that actually states, yes, you are tax exempt, and it gives you the section numbers under the IRS code that you fall under. And that's a very, very, very important piece of paper. And the thing to remember, and there's your homework. Go back to your organization and say, where is our letter of determination? Because what ends up happening with, and I've had personal experience with this with the organization I was assisting. They're trying to submit they were trying to submit a proposal. They could not find their letter of determination. And especially if you're a small nonprofit organization, what ends up happening is you've got the treasurer secretary that keeps up with all the paperwork of the organization. And as the secretary changes over the years, basically there's a box of materials that follows the new secretary around. And sometimes things just get lost. That letter of determination, you need to know where it is. And you can get a replacement copy from the IRS. However, you may not get it in time to meet the deadline of the grant you're trying to get. So that's your homework. Make sure that you've got a copy of it. It is considered public information, so the easiest way to keep track of that is stick it on your website. For those of you that are nonprofit organizations, you've probably got a website, because you got to have a website so you can have that nice little donate button so you can try to raise funds other ways, because you can't live on grants. And so usually there's an about section where you talk about the organization. Just stick your letter of determination on that. It is public information. If somebody asks you, if just a member of the public comes and asks you, I want to see a copy of your letter of determination, you are required by the IRS to provide it. So make sure it's available in some way, shape, or form. Find out where it is. And if you simply find out through your homework that we don't know where it is, make sure you request a copy from the IRS. If you are a new organization within the last 2 to 3 years, the IRS has now started to post those letters on their website. If you go to irs.gov, there's a section called charities. Just click on that and you can actually use their search engine to search for nonprofits. And most of the newer ones will have a copy of their IRS letter of determination under their profile. If you're older than that, it may or may not be there. They're slowly adding it, but pretty much right now it's only for the new organizations. So basically, if they ask for it, include it. If not, don't even think about it. Okay, the sometimes depressing or exaltation part of the proposal, the yes and the no. So you've submitted your proposal and you're waiting. You're waiting. Where's my money? Oh, I'm sorry, there was a question here that I think I missed because I got busy. Okay. Okay, that's a fairly detailed question. I'll look at it towards the end of the class and I'll get, yeah, looking for grants to help your nonprofit grow. Those are difficult. I'll talk a little bit more about those. Okay, follow up, yes or no. Now let's be optimistic and say, oops, come back here. That they give a yes. So you do your happy dance. You keep the funder. Now do realize that generally you don't just get sent a check. Typically the funder will contact you. You'll get a formal letter of agreement that you have to sign. It is basically a business arrangement. You know, you'll have to do that before you actually get a copy of the check. And always keep the funder informed with the way that they require. You know, this is not free money. There's always going to be strings attached. So if the funder asks for monthly reports, if they ask for quarterly reports, the amount of information that you have to provide the funder, the amount of feedback is usually proportional to the amount of money. If you're getting a multi-million-dollar grant from the federal government for an education program, you probably will have to have a staff just to keep up with the reporting requirements. If you've just got maybe like a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 grant from a funder for a local program, maybe a monthly report, maybe even just a report at the end of the project tell them how it went. It all depends. Always follow the funder's guidelines as to how they want the information to be reported, and be responsive. You know, if the foundation funder asks a question, answer promptly. If you have an issue that pops up within the program, because you know sometimes things just don't go the way we want them, be sure to contact the funder and let them know that this issue has popped up and we may have to modify our project in some way. I love that example of the gas prices because that's a big issue with a lot of funders, a lot of projects that include any type of transportation component. Things happen. Gas prices go up, all of a sudden what you've budgeted for the gas prices isn't going to be enough. Contact the funder and see what your options are. Sometimes they might provide you with some more money. Sometimes you might be able to modify the scale of your project to match the amount of money you have available. But basically, do what you said you were going to do. What you're doing when you do that is you build credibility for your organization. The more successful you are at carrying out your projects, the more you get credibility for your organization. The more credible your organization, the easier it is to get a grant. And you sometimes get jealous of all these large nonprofits that you hear about all the time that just seem to get grant after grant after grant. Habitat for Humanity, you know, American Red Cross, you know, they seem to always end up getting grants for one thing or the other. And the reason why is that they've been very successful with their programs. They've always followed the directions. They've met their goals and objectives. And unfortunately, funders like successful organizations. And the more successful you are, the more likely you are to get continued funding for that organization. So that's something to always remember when you're trying to carry out the project is, you know, it's your reputation online. And the better your reputation, the easier it is to get funding. Now, unfortunately, grants are extremely competitive. And since in the past 5 or 6 years that the IRS has made it easier to become a tax-exempt organization, 501c3, there are more and more nonprofits out there following the same pot of money or the smaller pot of money that's available. So more than likely the answer will be no when you're actually submitting a proposal, requesting a grant. The first thing to remember is it's not personal. And there are some foundations that just don't have enough staff to actually give you a critique of, you know, this is why we didn't give you a grant. But it's typically not personal. The number one reason why organizations don't get the grants they went after is there just isn't enough money to go around. And there's a lot of good projects that need funding. And in that particular case, ask about future funding. You know, like, hey, well, we didn't get the grant this time, but can we submit it during the next grant cycle? For many small funders, that's typically once a year. Larger funders tend to have multiple grant cycles per year. So ask, you know, is this something that, you know, can we submit it in the next cycle? If they give you feedback and say, you know, your proposal is a little bit weak in the project description, you need to do a little bit better job at describing your project. We didn't think your budget was detailed enough. If you're going to submit the proposal again, listen to that feedback, modify your proposal before you submit it again. And then there's sometimes when you've done all your research, you think that you've found the perfect funder, you've submitted your proposal, and then you find out that they've changed their focus. For a lot of small private foundations, small family foundations, what ends up happening is, especially in a family foundation, new family members come into the foundation, and they have different goals that they want to follow. And so they used to do education, now they're just doing animal welfare. So just say, thank you very much, move on, find another prospect. In that follow-up, you've got grant management. That's always the fun stuff. This is the part where we talked about actually meeting the requirements of the funder to the reporting requirements. And again, this is something that will not only get you credibility as an organization if you carry them out. If you don't meet these requirements, and it depends on the actual signed statement that you did with the funder, sometimes they might ask for that money back if you don't meet those requirements. So remember, it's not free money, it's money with strings. And if you don't meet the requirements of the funder, you don't carry out the project, you don't do the correct financial reporting, there may be a financial cost to that, and you might be required to give that money back. So make sure you follow all the grant requirements, the financial reporting, the programmatic reporting, and always follow the funder's guidelines. Make the funder happy, and you'll probably end up with more money. So basically, start with an outline. And again, in the handouts, for those of you that may have come in after we started, in the menu on the right-hand side of your screen, or that little orange arrow to make it pop out, there's 2 handouts with the slides and also some other information. One of those handouts is a proposal outline. And it's a sample project, a summer reading program, and it talks about the goals, objectives. What I like to tell people is you really need to have that basic level of information before you even start about thinking to look for a funder. Keep the language clear and concise. You don't know who's going to be reading your proposal, except in very specific circumstances. If you are doing a research grant to the National Institutes of Health for a medical research project, you can be pretty much sure that the people reviewing your project will be medical professionals. But for almost any other funder, you don't know who's going to be reading who is it that's going to be reviewing the proposal. For most private foundations, it'll be business people. So clear and concise, don't use jargon, don't use acronyms, unless they're acronym that everybody knows. So IRS, everybody knows what IRS is in the US, but otherwise spell everything out. Always focus on the funder's interest. Why is the funder interested in this particular area? If you've got something, if you're in Anderson County and you're applying to the Abney Foundation, why are you applying to the Abney Foundation? The Abney family was based in Anderson County, and they started the foundation to give back to their communities. That's why they're interested in it. Always follow the funder's guidelines and revise and edit before submitting. Do not trust Microsoft spell check and grammar check. It's not really the best. Find somebody, one of the best things to do is to find somebody outside your organization that has a good background in basic English and can take a look at your proposal, both for the basic grammar errors and spelling errors. And also, I have read proposals where by the time I finish reading the proposal, I'm still not sure what they were doing. Within your organization, you know what it is that you're doing. or have you actually communicated it through your proposal? So find somebody outside your organization to read it and see if they can figure it out. What is this project you're carrying it out? What are your goals and objectives? If they can figure it out, then a reviewer for a funder can figure that out as well. So that's kind of really the most important part of doing a proposal. That's the format that I showed you here. Again, it's a template. You can change it up. You can pretty much match any funder's guidelines with that information. And let's see. Let's see. Yeah, let me bring up a few things here. Get out of my way here. There we go. State Library. Okay. So that's the basics. And let me take a look at that. I had one question that came in, and it's a long, detailed question on grants to help your nonprofit grow. The thing to remember is that most grants are for projects. The grants typically are not for operations, they're not for salaries, unless they can be connected to a specific project. Money for overall, like overhead expenses for your organization, for capital expenses, for growth potential, those are rare and hard to come by. And fortunately, the database that we have, the Foundation Directory Online, you can actually narrow your search by funders that are interested in that. But you typically have to look for a particular funder that's interested in that type of program. For those community foundations, like the Central Carolina Community Foundation, they have on occasion offered grants and funding specifically for that, for growth and learning for nonprofit organizations, basically help the organizations become sustainable. But that varies tremendously. That's something, let me show you here. Get this out of the way here. What you should see on the screen now is the homepage for the State Library. There's one of our lions in front. We're one of those libraries that has lions. You'll see that logo everywhere. That's why you see the lion logo everywhere. And if you look under our Programs and Services tab, and most of you may have already seen this, we've got our grants research information here. And one thing that you can do, that question, this is something that you might want to set up an appointment with me specifically. You can actually contact me and make an appointment to actually come to the building. The virtual appointment is a meeting over Zoom. And that's actually been really nice, because it used to be that you had to drive all the way from wherever you were, you had to drive to the State Library to meet with me. But now you can just meet over Zoom. And just because you're in Columbia doesn't mean you can't meet over Zoom. We are in downtown Columbia, and while USC is in session, good luck finding parking. You probably have to walk 3 or 4 blocks just to find a parking space anywhere near the State Library. Yeah, that's because while USC is in session, it's really hard to find parking down here. But the virtual appointment, just meet over Zoom. I can show you all the same information, and that way you can decide, is it worth coming down to the State Library to do a little bit more detailed research? Got some more grant. I mentioned the grants research. Actually, it's the end of March, the very last day of March. Got a whole session just on how to do research and what the funders are looking for. And something else to remember, we're a partner. We're a Funding Information Resource Network partner with Candid, formerly known as the Foundation Center. And they have on their website a lot of free webinars and tutorials, including this particular one, which is Introduction to Proposal Writing. There's one specifically for project budgets that I do highly recommend for anyone that is writing a project budget for a proposal for the first time, because it goes into a lot more detail than what I can go through on this. Information like starting a nonprofit, corporate giving, and something that's really useful is about half of their webinars and of the tutorials were fee-based. but last month, almost everything became free. So take advantage of that. A lot of people will spend, hundreds or thousands of dollars taking training on like how to write proposals, do nonprofit. You can get almost all of that for free through resources like the State Library, through resources like Candid. There's plenty of information there available. The main resource that we have here at the State Library is the Foundation Directory online. It's a database of almost 150,000 funders, both mainly private funders, corporate giving programs, other types of funders for nonprofit organizations or government agencies. The trick is to access the full database, you do have to be here at the State Library. And it's not just us. There's about 6 or 7 other locations throughout the state of South Carolina that have access to this database. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, I've got the other libraries in the state that have it. And I've also recently found out that the York County Library up in Rock Hill, they also have access to this database. So there's plenty of spots around the state where you can actually access data. You're also welcome to subscribe to it yourself, but it is a very expensive database, close to $2,000 a year for a full subscription. So you might want to, even with the price of gas and cost of travel, you might still want to think about traveling to the State Library. And if you do have a virtual meeting with me, I can still show you how to use the database during our meeting, and I can send you some files of potential funders. So other resources that we have here, we've got other grant resources. Something I do want to point out, the tabs up here at the top, I've got one specifically on fundraising because you can't live on grants. As a nonprofit organization, you've got to have that donate button on your website. You've got to have other types of fundraising activities to get money to come into your organization. Because again, most grants are for specific programs or projects. And if you're trying to find money to pay the rent or to pay the electric bill or to pay the fee for your website, that's typically not what you get grant money for. That's something you'll have to do some other types of fundraising. And we are a library, and libraries have books. And for those of you that, and don't forget that, always check with your local public library and see what they might have available. But if you are a resident of South Carolina, 18 or over, you can apply for a state library card, and you don't even have to come to the state library to pick it up. We will mail it to you. Ignore anything it says. We will actually mail the card to you. And although it might be hard to get our physical books, we have an awful lot of ebooks on fundraising. We have a lot of ebooks on proposal writing. We have lots of information available that doesn't require you to step foot in the library. So all this information is available at no charge. So plenty of resources out there. Some other resources, which I'm going to jump back to the home tab. Close that out. We've got the virtual appointment. Again, that's something I really do recommend. I set the appointment times about 2 weeks in advance. So if you're trying to find an appointment at the end of March, you won't see that listed. I only do it for about 2 weeks out. But again, it's virtual. You just meet over Zoom. Really easy to do. I do want to show you these other resources that are available here. Some of these free foundation resources. Come back up here. For those of you that are nonprofit organizations, hang on a second. For those of you that have been around, you may remember this site as GrantSpace. It is now Candid Learning. And a lot of this information, they have a lot of tutorials, they have a lot of webinars that have been recorded, they have some live webinars that you can attend. But one thing that they also have is a lot of events where basically you're meeting funders. And they have recordings of interviews that they did with funders. And it's really useful in many cases to find out from the other point of view, what is it funders are looking for in a proposal? What is it they're looking for in the description of your project? So lots of information available here. And other resources that are available. One of the #1 questions I get asked is, do you have samples of proposals? Because they're hard to find. Even federal proposals, which technically are things that you can get with a Freedom of Information request, they don't do a really good job of posting those to their websites, and they're really hard sometimes to dig out. But what the Foundation Center, now Candid, did was they went to a lot of the nonprofits and funders that they work with, and they got actual sample proposals, not just samples. These are actual proposals that got funded. You do have to create a free account to access the training, to access the actual full text of the proposals. It's well worth it. They don't spam you. And any information that they send you is usually very useful for your nonprofit or yourself as for learning information on proposals. All this training, they got plenty of information on fundraising. They got plenty of information on proposal writing. And one of the things I like about these sections where they talk about the blogs, knowledge sample documents, let me get back to your knowledge base. Let's see. Oh, here's one question. Will foundations fund overhead or administrative cost? Let's just bring that one up here. And by the way, if for any reason you're not able to contact me or you want another opinion, they've actually got an online librarian service. This is from their the headquarters of Candid Foundation Center is in New York City, and they have their own staff there, and you can ask them a question. They may not answer right away, but usually they answer within a few days. So if you've got a question about a specific funder, you got a question about a specific, like this question that was up here that on partnerships, you might be able to find, they might be able to provide you some really good resources. Or you can contact me at your preference. If you take a look at any of these topics that they've got listed under their resources here on the Learning at Candid website, you see that not only do they include their own information, they include a curated list of other resources. So it's not just them. Like this one here, this is from the Nonprofit Association of Oregon. Here in South Carolina, the local group here in South Carolina for nonprofit organizations is Together SC. I do recommend taking a look at their website, Together SC, and look at the resources that they have available on their website. But like this is the whole information here on like funding overhead, different things that you can think about. What do funders think about funding overhead? It's like nobody likes to fund overhead. That's one reason why fundraising through other resources is very important. But you can basically do a college course in fundraising and proposal writing and nonprofit management off the resources that are available on the Candid Learning page. And the thing to remember is, why does Candid do this? Candid, formerly known as the Foundation Center, they were founded originally as a nonprofit organization to disseminate information about nonprofits and foundations. They got a really interesting origin story as to why they did that. And it all goes back to the Red Scare of the 1950s, when Congress wanted to know, there's all these foundations out there like Ford Foundation, Carnegie Foundation. What are they doing with their money, and are they giving them to communists? The Foundation Center was set up so that the information could be disseminated for the public. No, we're not giving it to communists, we're giving it to education, we're giving it to schools, we're giving it to community programs. So all this information that's out there available, you can take a look at. Can't possibly cover every single thing with proposal writing. but there's a lot of stuff that's available. One thing I do want to point out, let's see, I mentioned that the IRS has copies of your they have copies of your IRS letter of determination. Let me just show you that really briefly. And I've got a link here directly to their list of their tax exempt search, but let me just take you irs.gov. And of course, right now everybody's finding out, where's my refund? Where's my refund coming from? But the charities and nonprofit tab up here has an awful lot of information about tax exempt charity or nonprofits. And one of the most interesting is the search organizations. If you are a tax exempt organization and you've actually applied for a grant, one of the things that the funder will do is they'll check your status. You have to submit your letter of determination, but they will double check to make sure that you are actually listed in the tax exempt organization search tool. It's thinking, search for tax exempt organizations. And if you're not in this list as a tax exempt organization, they'll have questions. Right now they're behind, so if you are a brand new organization within the past 6 months or so, you may not be in this list just because they haven't caught up with you yet. But you'll see here that, let's look for some new ones in Columbia, South Carolina, organization name, let's just do Palmetto. Search. It's not the fastest database in the world, but you've got a lot of information here. And you'll see here, this is a newer one. If you see where it's got determination letters, that means that this is a newer organization, and they actually have a copy of your determination. They do it in this weird format called TIFF, but you can download it and save it as a PDF. It's thinking. Come on. Well, it didn't really work the way I expected it to, but this is where it would be. You would be able to download this and oh, there it is, sign the letter. There we go. It took a while. Okay. Let me blow that up a bit. So what you see, oh, come back here. So what you see here is the actual letter that the IRS sends your organization that says, yes, you are exempt from federal income tax. You are 501c3. This is a very important letter and you need to keep track of it in your organization. All this information that's available, and one thing I do, want to point out is a lot of people, they're looking, you go online, you look for information on writing proposals. Nothing has really changed with the method of actually writing proposals, the type of thing that the funder is looking for. It hasn't changed for decades. The only thing that's changed is that little bit of the internet that's been thrown in. And that doesn't even help you for about 50% of foundations that still require you to print it out and mail it in. And a lot of foundations still use PO boxes, which means you can't FedEx it. You have to use the good old-fashioned US Postal Service. But I do want to show you something that I happened to find in one of our databases. Let me bring it up here. And by the way, this right here is the proposal project outline sample I was talking about in your handouts. Again, these handouts, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little menu. And if you click on that little orange arrow, it will pop it out. And these two handouts you can download as PDFs. But what I wanted to show you here is this article from 1967. Not long before I was born. which talks about how to write a research proposal. And when you go through this proposal, it actually covers things that are just as true today as they were when this was written. And what I want to do is scroll through and show you there's this section here, elements of a proposal. And this one, they have a title page. Again, that would be with the funder. You got your abstract, that would be the executive summary. The statement and method, that's your project description. Budget, always got to have a budget. The biographical information, that's the information on your organization. And then there's a section on the criteria on how they're judged. Remember, this is 1967. And if you go down here, I got this little section highlighted. The 4 main reasons that the applications, the proposals will get rejected. And procedures do not fit objectives. That basically means that you're not describing your project appropriately. You're not you've done your goals and objectives, but when you actually describe your project, you're like, they don't match. The procedures that you mentioned, the actual description of the project, the planning you've done, doesn't seem to match the objectives, and funders regard that as a red flag. The problem is not important. Well, that's a little bit bland way of saying it, but what it means is that the funder doesn't think that your statement of need is actually really needful, that you're not really meeting a true need in the community. The investigator, this is a research grant, is not trained to do the research. This goes to that section of your proposal where you actually talk about your organization, your expertise, your credibility, what experience you have that means that you would actually be able to carry out this project. And the description is not clear enough for evaluation. That kind of goes along with number 1 there, is you haven't described the project to the point where they can actually figure out, is this going to work? We can't tell if this is going to work or not. And these are the same reasons proposals get rejected today. Nothing's changed. So when you're actually going out there, and there is no bright shiny new way of doing a proposal. Funders have been asking the same questions for decades. So don't get upset if you think that there's something that you're not getting about proposals. Nothing's changed. They're wanting the same information. They want a detailed description. They want to know that you know what you're doing, and they want some confidence that the project that you describe is going to solve the problem that you've stated. There's a community that needs help. How are we going to actually do that? Let's see. Will we receive a PDF of writing those effective? What I will do is, in addition to the handouts, I will send you a link to the PDF. It's actually part of one of the Discus databases, which is one of the resources that the state library supplies to all the libraries in South Carolina. So you'll get a link that you'll be able to click on and be able to actually access the PDF. I might just throw the PDF in there, which it makes it a lot easier. But yeah, when you look at this article, just view it in the time frame of 1967. So you have to actually call and write letters and stuff. You still have to call and write letters for an awful lot of the funders that are out there. It hasn't changed. So yeah, we'll send that out as well. So it's well, about 10 minutes till. I wanted to leave a little bit of time at the end if anybody had any questions. And if you have any, if there's anything that you want to, if there's anything really, really detailed, a detailed question that you want answered, what I do recommend is that you email me directly. You set up an actual Zoom appointment. We can actually meet with you and talk about it in more detail. I will say that I get lots and lots and lots of emails dealing with grants. If you don't hear from me within a couple of days, I'm not ignoring you. You've just hit the bottom of my inbox and there's too many things on top and I just missed you. So yeah, just resend it and I'll eventually find you and hopefully we'll try to respond to you. But yeah, I am interested in trying to assist you, and I will not help you write your proposal. I will help you learn how to do it. I won't write the proposal for you, but there's a lot of good information out there to help you do that. And if you start especially with some of those foundations that have online websites, if you're doing anything literacy based, family literacy, health literacy, youth literacy, the Dollar General Literacy Foundation is a really good organization to start with. And it's one of those, the Dollar General Literacy Foundation, foundations are all geographically limited. The Dollar General Literacy Foundation only gives in areas where there's a Dollar General, which is everywhere. So that's one good thing about that particular foundation where they serve. And that's all part of the research process, knowing the actual foundations, the areas that they serve, the subject areas they do, the geographic area that they give in. Okay, I'm just looking to see if we got anything else popping up here. Now I'll hang around here for a few more minutes, but it's getting close to lunchtime. And even though it was getting kind of cloudy, at least in Columbia, it was getting rather cloudy. At least it's nice and warm. And hopefully we'll get some rain and it'll wash away some of this pollen. I had to wash my windshield this morning because I tried to look out of it and it was all covered with pollen. Okay, I'm checking to see if we've got, yeah, and I'm hoping that this actually inspires you to actually try to write a proposal. There is money out there available. And even if it is extremely competitive, if you've got a compelling need and you've got a project that really looks like it's going to solve that problem that you've identified, there is money out there. And let's see, I got a question that came up submitted. Letter determination, the IRS gives you that to you at the time when your organization is started. So it's one time. The only time that it is not one time, it's there's no now annually you do have to submit. If you are a 501c3 tax exempt organization, you do have to submit an annual tax return. And the type of tax return you submit will depend on the size of your organization. They go into vast detail on that on the IRS website. If you're teeny tiny, you'll do basically what they call the postcard form, which is the real short, basically, hello, we're here and we're still existing. If you're a very large organization, you'll do the full 990 tax, IRS 990 tax return. The thing to remember is that as a 501c3 organization, you are required to submit that tax return in whatever format each year. And if you go for 3 years without submitting the tax return, the IRS will revoke your tax exempt status. And that actually happens to more nonprofits than you think, especially if they're very small, if they have a lot of change in staff, and whoever's the new secretary, treasurer doesn't realize that they have to file that tax return. Especially now, the IRS will send you notifications, but if your address changes, if your email address changes, nobody knows how to contact them. Oh dear, that means that you might get your tax, you might even realize that your tax exempt status has been revoked. But if they, what ends up happening if your tax exempt status is revoked and you don't realize it and you try to apply for a grant, they'll look it up on the IRS website and all of a sudden, well, your status has been revoked, and you're like, what? So that's something you have to remember every year. And that's something you might want to put on the calendar. Every year, check to make sure that you've submitted that return. Check yourself in IRS tax exempt organization database to make sure. Got a question here. Do we have a quick list of federal state grants, nationally or statewide? Federal is easy. Federal is grants.gov, and it is searchable by a number of different categories. So you can take a look at that, and you can restrict the search down to where they give. State grants, the vast majority of state grants, state government grants, are actually federal grants, community block grants that are actually being managed by the various state agencies. A lot of the money that the Department of Education, South Carolina Department of Education makes available as grants is basically money that comes from the federal government. There's not actually as much state money that's available as grants. In very specific cases, things like the South Carolina Commission on the Arts. The South Carolina Commission on the Arts, they do get a lot of their money from federal, but there is a pot of state money that they also manage in terms of grants for individual artists and art organizations. There is no quick list. No. With federal grants.gov, everything is listed there, although it's kind of awkward to use. State grants, statewide, the foundation directory online does include some federal grants, and you can actually restrict the search to where those grants apply. Grants that apply in South Carolina, grants that are actually available for South Carolina organizations. We also do have another database, let me bring it up here, called GrantWatch. And the Foundation Directory Online database is a list of potential funders. So you still have to contact them and find out, what grants they might have available. We have another database called GrantWatch. And if you look on our page, we've got that here. And again, it's only the full access to the database is only available here in the building, but it's an actual list of available grants. It's heavily biased towards federal and other government grants, but it has private funders in it as well. But the difference is that it's not just a list of potential funders. It is actually current grants that are available for application. It's grantwatch.com, and you can actually search it for free. Anybody can search it for free. You can just go to grantwatch.com. To actually view the profiles, you have to have a subscription, which is what we have here. But it's really good if you want to just take a look at it and see, what kind of things can we find out in that? And so that would be something that you can take a look at. That's the two main resources we have. This foundation grants to individuals online, it is primarily scholarships. Okay. I'm gonna wait around about a minute to see other questions, but it's lunchtime. And if we want to take a look and see, let's see, lunchtime. I'm just peering over at my other screen. I just wanted to see what do we have in the way of weather, because there are possibility of some rain here in South Carolina. And if you're not located in South Carolina, welcome to South Carolina. Yeah, I'm seeing a little bit of rain on the radar, but otherwise it's quite warm. If you go out and eat outside, be sure to bring a paper towel to wipe away the pollen so you don't get it all over your clothes. And this actually might be a good time of year to wear a mask. Forget COVID, there's pollen. Yeah, and thank you all for coming. And again, there's plenty of information here. Like I said, if you do choose to email me, I am not ignoring you. You are just somewhere in the great, great monster of my inbox. And I will eventually dig you out and respond to you. Sometimes it's easier to actually set up an appointment, because that way I will be there if you set up an appointment. So any other information we have there? Yeah, plenty of stuff here. Like I said, there's so much information now. 10 years ago, when you actually looked online for grants information, typically you'd get some very scuzzy websites that were all they wanted was your credit card. There's still a lot of fee-based stuff out there that is quite good, but there's so much free stuff now that there's no real reason to pay for anything but a very, very advanced grant proposal class. And there's some of those out there as well. The Foundation Center itself, Candid, offers a multi-day, what they call a proposal writing boot camp that I do recommend. It's several $100s, but it's one of those where you actually go, you immerse yourself for several days, and at the end of it, you actually walk out with a proposal that you've written and it's been vetted by the staff. So it's you're actually paying to be tortured, if you want to put it one way. But it was it's a really great program if you can afford it, and compared to others out there, it's actually very inexpensive. Okay, I hope I didn't miss any questions. Okay. Okay, I'm not seeing any new questions pop up, which tells me it's time for lunch. And what we'll do is we'll just close it out and have a great day and enjoy the weather, even though it's warmer than it should be, but it's going to be a great day. Rain will get rid of some of the pollen and hopefully we'll have some better weather. Have a great day.